Question 1. The analysis reveals that a client who is seeking investment advice has expressed a strong preference for a particular investment strategy that, while potentially offering high returns, carries significant risks and appears to be at odds with current regulatory guidelines regarding suitability for their profile. The professional advisor must determine the most appropriate course of action. Option A. Advise the client that their preferred strategy is not viable and refuse to discuss it further, suggesting they seek advice elsewhere. Option B. Immediately implement the client's preferred strategy to ensure client satisfaction, assuming the client understands the potential risks. Option C. Proceed with the client's preferred strategy, but omit any mention of the associated risks or regulatory concerns to avoid alarming the client. Option D. Clearly explain the risks and regulatory concerns associated with the client's preferred strategy. Offer alternative strategies that align with the client's objectives and regulatory requirements, and document the discussion and the final decision. Correct answer is D. Clearly explain the risks and regulatory concerns associated with the client's preferred strategy. Offer alternative strategies that align with the client's objectives and regulatory requirements, and document the discussion and the final decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the professional's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when that preference might lead to suboptimal outcomes or regulatory noncompliance. The professional must navigate the ethical imperative of client autonomy against the responsibility to provide sound, objective advice and adhere to regulatory guidelines. The pressure to maintain client relationships can also complicate objective decision-making. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes the professional's duty to provide objective, informed advice and to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations. This involves clearly explaining the risks and potential downsides of the client's preferred course of action, offering alternative solutions that align with the client's objectives while adhering to best practices and regulatory requirements, and documenting all discussions and decisions thoroughly. This upholds the professional's fiduciary responsibility, ensures the client's long-term interests are served, and maintains regulatory integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately acceding to the client's request without further discussion or exploration of alternatives. This fails to uphold the professional's duty of care and fiduciary responsibility, potentially exposing the client to undue risk or regulatory breaches. It prioritizes client satisfaction over sound professional judgment and regulatory compliance. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand the underlying rationale or offering constructive alternatives. This can damage the client relationship and may overlook valid, albeit perhaps poorly articulated, client needs. While the professional must maintain ethical standards, a complete dismissal without dialogue is not best practice. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the client's request while downplaying or omitting any potential risks or regulatory concerns. This is a serious ethical and regulatory failure, as it constitutes a lack of transparency and potentially misleads the client about the implications of their decision. It violates the principle of informed consent and the professional's obligation to act with integrity. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's objectives and concerns. This is followed by an objective assessment of the situation, considering all relevant regulatory requirements, ethical principles, and potential outcomes. The professional should then clearly communicate their findings and recommendations to the client, explaining the rationale behind their advice and any associated risks or benefits. If the client's preference conflicts with professional judgment or regulatory requirements, the professional must engage in a transparent discussion, offer alternatives, and document the agreed-upon course of action and the reasons for it. If a client insists on a course of action that is unethical or illegal, the professional must be prepared to disengage from the relationship. Question 2. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a key client is expressing significant dissatisfaction with the current I/O solutions tests, suggesting they are overly burdensome and hindering their ability to execute trades quickly. The client is pressuring the firm to expedite their testing process, implying that a more favorable outcome would be beneficial for their business relationship. Option A. Inform the client that their feedback is noted but proceed with the standard I/O solutions tests without any further discussion or attempt to address their concerns about the process. Option B. Immediately waive the standard I/O solutions tests for this client to appease them and expedite their trading, prioritizing the client relationship over the established testing procedures. Option C. Discreetly alter the parameters or interpretation of the I/O solutions tests for this client to produce a more favorable outcome, thereby satisfying their request and preserving the business relationship. Option D. Adhere strictly to the established I/O solutions tests protocols for all clients, including this one, while communicating the importance of these tests for ensuring fair and objective investment decisions, and exploring if any procedural efficiencies can be implemented within the existing framework without compromising integrity. The correct answer is D. Adhere strictly to the established I/O solutions tests protocols for all clients, including this one, while communicating the importance of these tests for ensuring fair and objective investment decisions, and exploring if any procedural efficiencies can be implemented within the existing framework without compromising integrity. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of a client with the long-term integrity of the investment process and regulatory compliance. The firm's reputation and the trust of all stakeholders, not just the immediate client, are at risk. Careful judgment is needed to navigate the pressure to prioritize a single client's request over established procedures and ethical obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it upholds the principles of fair dealing and market integrity, which are fundamental to the regulatory framework governing investment firms. By adhering to the established I/O solutions test protocols, the firm ensures that all clients are treated equitably and that investment decisions are based on objective analysis rather than undue influence. This aligns with the regulatory expectation that firms act in the best interests of their clients as a whole and maintain robust internal controls to prevent conflicts of interest and market manipulation. An incorrect approach that involves bypassing the standard I/O solutions tests for this specific client would represent a failure to comply with internal policies designed to ensure objectivity and fairness. This could lead to accusations of preferential treatment, potentially violating regulations that mandate equal access to information and fair execution of trades for all clients. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to subtly influence the test results to favor the client's desired outcome, would be a direct breach of ethical conduct and potentially regulatory rules against misrepresentation or manipulation. This undermines the credibility of the testing process and the firm itself. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the feedback and proceed with the standard tests without addressing the client's concerns, fails to acknowledge the importance of client relationships and effective communication, even if the ultimate decision is to follow procedure. While adhering to procedure is important, a complete disregard for client input can damage trust and lead to future conflicts. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical principles. This involves first understanding the nature of the stakeholder feedback and its implications, then assess the feedback against the firm's established policies and regulatory obligations. If the feedback suggests a deviation from these standards, the professional must identify the potential risks and ethical conflicts. The decision should be to uphold the integrity of the process, communicate transparently with the stakeholder about the reasons for adhering to the established procedures, and explore alternative, compliant ways to address their concerns if possible. Question 3. Research into a client's stated preference for a highly speculative, illiquid investment product, which appears to contradict their stated long-term retirement savings goals and moderate risk tolerance, presents an ethical dilemma for an investment advisor. The advisor has conducted initial suitability checks and believes the product is not appropriate for the client's circumstances. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound course of action for the advisor? Option A. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, assuming the client is fully informed and has the ultimate authority over their investment decisions to avoid potential client dissatisfaction. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their preference. Explain the potential risks and rewards of the proposed investment in the context of their overall financial plan, and present alternative, more suitable options that align with their stated goals. Option C. Advise the client to seek independent financial advice elsewhere if they insist on pursuing the speculative investment, thereby distancing the firm from any potential negative outcomes. Option D. Immediately reject the client's request and inform them that the proposed investment is unsuitable without further explanation to prevent any potential regulatory scrutiny. The correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their preference. Explain the potential risks and rewards of the proposed investment in the context of their overall financial plan, and present alternative, more suitable options that align with their stated goals. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the potential for those preferences to lead to suboptimal or even harmful investment outcomes, especially when viewed through the lens of fiduciary duty and regulatory expectations. The advisor must navigate the delicate balance of respecting client autonomy while fulfilling their obligation to act in the client's best interest. The regulatory framework for I/O solutions tests, which emphasizes suitability and client protection, is paramount here. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the client's true financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, even if those differ from their initial stated desires. This aligns with the core principles of Know Your Client (KIC) and suitability requirements mandated by regulatory bodies overseeing investment advice. By engaging in a deeper dialogue and presenting objective analysis, the advisor upholds their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, ensuring that any recommendations are grounded in a comprehensive assessment rather than superficial preferences. This proactive and investigative approach is a cornerstone of responsible financial advice. An incorrect approach that solely relies on the client's initial, potentially ill-informed, preference fails to meet the regulatory standard of suitability. It risks exposing the client to undue risk or missing out on opportunities that are genuinely aligned with their long-term financial well-being. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to exercise professional judgment, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions for not acting in the client's best interest. Another incorrect approach that involves overriding the client's wishes without proper explanation or justification is also professionally unacceptable. While the advisor has a duty to guide, they do not have the right to dictate. This can erode client trust and lead to disputes. The regulatory framework typically requires clear communication and client consent for investment decisions. A third incorrect approach that involves simply disengaging from the client due to their stated preference without attempting to understand or educate is a dereliction of professional duty. It avoids the challenge but fails to serve the client's needs and potentially leaves them vulnerable to making poor decisions independently. Professional advisors are expected to guide and educate, not abandon clients when faced with complex situations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Active listening and clarification. Understand the client's stated preference and the underlying reasons. 2. Information gathering. Collect comprehensive data on the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives. 3. Objective analysis. Evaluate the suitability of the client's stated preference against their overall financial profile and market realities. 4. Education and guidance. Clearly explain the potential implications, risks, and benefits of various options, including the client's initial preference and alternative, more suitable strategies. 5. Collaborative decision-making. Work with the client to arrive at an investment decision that is both aligned with their objectives and meets regulatory suitability standards. 6. Documentation. Maintain thorough records of all discussions, analyses, and decisions. Question 4. Examination of the data shows that the current I/O solutions testing process for a large sales team is time-consuming and has a high administrative overhead. Management is requesting significant process optimization to reduce costs and speed up candidate selection. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for optimizing I/O testing processes? Option A. Significantly reduce the number of test items across all assessments to expedite the testing process, with the primary goal of lowering completion time. Option B. Focus solely on streamlining the scheduling and logistical aspects of test administration, without re-evaluating the content or psychometric properties of the tests themselves. Option C. Conduct a thorough psychometric analysis of the existing test battery to identify redundant items or subscales and explore the potential for reducing test length while maintaining acceptable levels of reliability and validity, supported by empirical data on predictive utility. Option D. Immediately replace the current testing platform with a new, AI-driven system that promises a 50% reduction in administration time based on vendor testimonials. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough psychometric analysis of the existing test battery to identify redundant items or subscales and explore the potential for reducing test length while maintaining acceptable levels of reliability and validity, supported by empirical data on predictive utility. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficiency and cost reduction with the imperative to maintain the integrity and effectiveness of I/O solutions testing. The pressure to optimize processes can lead to shortcuts that compromise the validity of the tests, potentially resulting in misinformed decisions about candidate suitability or developmental needs. Careful judgment is required to identify optimization strategies that enhance efficiency without sacrificing the scientific rigor and predictive validity of the I/O tests. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven evaluation of existing processes before implementing changes. This aligns with ethical guidelines and regulatory frameworks that emphasize the responsible development, validation, and application of psychological assessments. Specifically, it adheres to principles of psychometric soundness and utility, ensuring that any proposed optimization is grounded in evidence of its impact on test fairness, reliability, and validity. This approach also reflects a commitment to continuous improvement based on empirical data, a cornerstone of professional I/O psychology practice. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reducing the number of test items without considering the impact on reliability and validity would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate principles of psychometric integrity, potentially leading to a reduction in the test's ability to accurately measure the intended constructs. Another incorrect approach, such as implementing a new, unvalidated testing platform based purely on vendor claims of efficiency, would disregard the need for empirical evidence of its effectiveness and fairness, risking discriminatory outcomes or inaccurate assessments. A third incorrect approach, prioritizing speed of administration over thorough data analysis and interpretation, would undermine the purpose of I/O testing, which is to provide meaningful insights for decision-making. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the objectives of process optimization. This should be followed by a thorough assessment of the current state, identifying bottlenecks and areas for improvement. Any proposed changes must be evaluated for their potential impact on psychometric properties, fairness, and legal defensibility. Pilot testing and validation of optimized processes are crucial before full implementation. Continuous monitoring and evaluation are also essential to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 5. Market research demonstrates that firms are increasingly seeking to optimize their I/O solutions testing processes to improve turnaround times and reduce operational costs. Considering the strict regulatory framework governing these tests, which of the following strategies best balances efficiency gains with the imperative of maintaining testing integrity and compliance? Option A. Focusing solely on reducing the number of test cases and the duration of each test to achieve cost savings, assuming that the core data generated will remain sufficient for regulatory purposes. Option B. Replicating process optimization techniques successfully employed in unrelated industries, such as retail inventory management, without a specific assessment of their applicability or impact on the unique requirements of I/O solutions tests. Option C. Adopting a new, cutting-edge testing software suite immediately based on its advertised efficiency benefits, without conducting pilot tests or verifying its compatibility with existing regulatory reporting requirements for I/O solutions tests. Option D. Implementing a phased approach to process optimization, beginning with a detailed analysis of current workflows, identifying specific bottlenecks, and piloting proposed changes with rigorous validation against established compliance metrics before full-scale deployment. The correct answer is D. Implementing a phased approach to process optimization, beginning with a detailed analysis of current workflows, identifying specific bottlenecks, and piloting proposed changes with rigorous validation against established compliance metrics before full-scale deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between optimizing operational efficiency and maintaining robust compliance with regulatory requirements. The firm is seeking to streamline its I/O solutions testing processes, which is a laudable business objective. However, any proposed optimization must not compromise the integrity of the testing, the accuracy of the results, or the adherence to the specific regulatory framework governing I/O solutions tests. The challenge lies in identifying solutions that enhance efficiency without introducing new risks or violating established protocols. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, data-driven evaluation of potential process changes. This involves a systematic analysis of current workflows, identification of bottlenecks, and the development of targeted improvements that are validated through pilot testing. This method ensures that any changes are not only efficient but also effective and compliant. It aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management, which are fundamental to regulatory compliance. By focusing on measurable outcomes and iterative refinement, this approach minimizes the risk of unintended consequences and ensures that the optimized process continues to meet all regulatory standards for I/O solutions tests. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a comprehensive impact assessment on testing accuracy and compliance would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the primary objective of I/O solutions tests, which is to provide reliable data for decision-making and regulatory oversight. Such an approach could lead to inaccurate results, misinformed decisions, and ultimately, breaches of regulatory requirements, exposing the firm to significant penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing untested technological solutions without proper validation or integration planning is also professionally unsound. It bypasses the critical step of ensuring that new technologies function as intended within the specific context of I/O solutions tests and do not introduce new vulnerabilities or compliance gaps. The regulatory framework for I/O solutions tests mandates a certain level of rigor and validation, which this approach would circumvent. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the practices of other unrelated industries for process optimization would be a significant ethical and professional failing. The regulatory framework for I/O solutions tests is specific and often industry-tailored. Applying generalized or irrelevant best practices without considering the unique requirements and constraints of this particular testing domain is a recipe for non-compliance and ineffective outcomes. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an insufficient understanding of the regulatory landscape. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the core objectives. Clearly define the goals of process optimization in the context of I/O solutions tests, balancing efficiency with compliance. 2. Conduct a thorough diagnostic, analyze current processes, identify pain points, and gather data on performance and compliance metrics. 3. Research and propose targeted solutions. Explore options that directly address identified issues and are demonstrably aligned with the regulatory framework. 4. Validate and pilot. Test proposed solutions in a controlled environment to assess their effectiveness, efficiency, and compliance impact. 5. Implement and monitor. Roll out validated changes and establish ongoing monitoring to ensure sustained performance and compliance. 6. Seek expert advice. Consult with internal compliance teams and external experts when navigating complex regulatory requirements. Question 6. To address the challenge of improving the efficiency of I/O solutions tests while maintaining their psychometric integrity, a team is considering various process optimization strategies. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for efficiency with the imperative to uphold the validity and reliability of the assessments? Option A. Eliminating routine quality assurance checks on test administration and scoring to expedite the processing of candidate results. Option B. Reducing the number of test items in each assessment module based on the subjective judgment of experienced administrators to shorten completion times. Option C. Conducting a thorough analysis of existing test administration and scoring procedures to identify bottlenecks, followed by a pilot study of proposed streamlined workflows that have been validated for their impact on test outcomes. Option D. Implementing a new, proprietary assessment tool that promises faster results, without conducting independent validation studies to confirm its psychometric properties. The correct answer is C. Conducting a thorough analysis of existing test administration and scoring procedures to identify bottlenecks, followed by a pilot study of proposed streamlined workflows that have been validated for their impact on test outcomes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficiency and cost reduction with the imperative to maintain the integrity and effectiveness of critical testing processes. The pressure to optimize can lead to shortcuts that compromise the validity of I/O solutions tests, potentially resulting in inaccurate assessments of candidate suitability or performance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that process optimization does not undermine the fundamental purpose of the tests. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and data-driven methodology for identifying and implementing improvements. This involves a thorough analysis of existing processes, the use of validated metrics, and the consideration of potential impacts on test validity and candidate experience. Adhering to established protocols for test development and validation, as outlined in relevant professional guidelines and regulatory frameworks, e.g., those governing psychometric testing and employment practices, ensures that any modifications are evidence-based and do not introduce bias or reduce the predictive power of the tests. This aligns with ethical obligations to use fair and effective assessment tools. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reducing the number of test items without a corresponding validation study fails to acknowledge the psychometric principles underlying test design. This could lead to a reduction in reliability and validity, meaning the test may no longer accurately measure what it intends to measure or produce consistent results. This violates professional standards that mandate the use of validated instruments. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing a new, unvalidated testing tool based on anecdotal evidence or perceived ease of administration ignores the rigorous validation requirements for assessment tools. This introduces a significant risk of using a tool that is not fit for purpose, potentially leading to discriminatory outcomes or poor hiring decisions, which contravenes regulations designed to ensure fairness and equity in employment. A third incorrect approach that involves bypassing established quality assurance checks for test administration and scoring, in an effort to save time, overlooks the critical role these checks play in ensuring data integrity. Errors in administration or scoring can render test results meaningless and lead to incorrect conclusions about candidates, violating ethical obligations to conduct assessments accurately and fairly. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the objectives of process optimization. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of the current state, identifying specific areas for improvement. Any proposed changes must be evaluated against established psychometric principles and relevant regulatory requirements. Pilot testing and validation of any modifications are crucial before full implementation. Continuous monitoring and feedback loops are essential to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 7. Analysis of process optimization within the I/O solutions testing department, which is currently experiencing delays and increased operational costs, requires a strategic approach. The firm is considering several methods to improve efficiency. Which of the following approaches best aligns with maintaining the integrity and regulatory compliance of the I/O solutions tests? Option A. Conducting a thorough review of current testing workflow, identifying specific bottlenecks through data analysis, developing targeted procedural enhancements, and piloting these changes with rigorous validation before full-scale deployment. Option B. Outsourcing a significant portion of the I/O solutions testing to a third-party vendor without a detailed review of their quality control processes or ensuring their adherence to the firm's specific regulatory requirements. Option C. Implementing a new, comprehensive testing automation suite after a brief vendor demonstration, without conducting internal pilot tests or impact assessments on existing data validation protocols. Option D. Expediting the testing cycle by reducing the number of required data verification steps, assuming that the new software being introduced will automatically compensate for any lost checks. The correct answer is C. Implementing a new, comprehensive testing automation suite after a brief vendor demonstration, without conducting internal pilot tests or impact assessments on existing data validation protocols. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for efficiency gains with the long-term implications of process changes on data integrity and regulatory compliance. The firm is under pressure to demonstrate improved operational performance, but any changes to the I/O solutions testing process must not compromise the accuracy or reliability of the test results, which are critical for client reporting and regulatory oversight. Careful judgment is required to ensure that process optimization does not inadvertently introduce risks or violate established testing protocols. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, data-driven evaluation of the existing process before implementing any changes. This involves detailed analysis of current performance metrics, identification of specific bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and the development of targeted solutions. Crucially, it mandates pilot testing and validation of proposed changes to ensure they achieve the desired optimization without negatively impacting the quality or compliance of the I/O solutions tests. This aligns with the principles of sound risk management and adherence to regulatory expectations for robust testing procedures, ensuring that any modifications are both effective and compliant. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on rapid implementation of a new, untested software tool without a comprehensive understanding of its impact on the I/O solutions testing workflow would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to unintended consequences such as inaccurate data capture, altered test outcomes, or a failure to meet specific testing requirements mandated by the relevant regulatory framework. Such an approach disregards the due diligence required to ensure that technological advancements enhance, rather than compromise, the integrity of regulated processes. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing established quality assurance and validation steps for the I/O solutions tests in the name of speed would be professionally unacceptable. This directly violates the ethical obligation to maintain the highest standards of accuracy and reliability in testing. From a regulatory perspective, it could be seen as a failure to adhere to internal control procedures and potentially lead to the submission of flawed data, resulting in breaches of compliance and reputational damage. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the objective. Clearly define the desired outcome of process optimization. 2. Assess the current state. Thoroughly analyze existing processes. Identify pain points and gather performance data. 3. Identify potential solutions. Brainstorm and research various methods for achieving the objective, considering both technological and procedural changes. 4. Evaluate risks and benefits. For each potential solution, assess its potential impact on efficiency, accuracy, compliance, and cost. 5. Develop a validation plan. Design a robust plan to test and verify the effectiveness and compliance of any proposed changes. 6. Implement and monitor. Roll out changes incrementally, with continuous monitoring and feedback mechanisms to ensure ongoing success and adherence to standards. 7. Document everything. Maintain detailed records of the entire process, from analysis to implementation and ongoing monitoring. Question 8. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive approach to process optimization, considering the imperative to enhance operational efficiency while upholding stringent regulatory standards and client trust. Which of the following strategies best reflects a prudent and compliant path forward for implementing new automation solutions? Option A. Relying solely on vendor assurances regarding the capabilities and compliance of automation tools without independent verification or internal testing. Option B. Immediate and widespread deployment of automation across all client-facing functions to achieve maximum cost savings and efficiency gains as quickly as possible. Option C. A phased rollout of automation, starting with internal, non-client-facing processes, allowing for thorough testing and risk assessment before expanding to more sensitive areas. Option D. Prioritizing automation solutions that offer the most significant cost reductions, with minimal upfront investment in validation or pilot programs. The correct answer is C. A phased rollout of automation, starting with internal non-client-facing processes, allowing for thorough testing and risk assessment before expanding to more sensitive areas. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where a firm must balance the drive for efficiency with the imperative to maintain robust compliance and client trust. The pressure to reduce operational costs through automation, while seemingly straightforward, can introduce significant risks if not managed with a deep understanding of regulatory requirements and potential client impact. The challenge lies in identifying the optimal point, where efficiency gains do not compromise the integrity of client data, the accuracy of reporting, or the firm's adherence to its regulatory obligations. This requires a nuanced approach that goes beyond mere technological implementation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a phased implementation of automation, beginning with non-critical, low-risk processes. This strategy is best professional practice because it allows for thorough testing, validation, and risk assessment at each stage. It aligns with regulatory principles of prudence and due diligence, ensuring that any automated system is functioning as intended and does not inadvertently lead to breaches of data privacy. Reporting errors or non-compliance with industry-specific regulations. This methodical approach minimizes the potential for widespread disruption or regulatory scrutiny, safeguarding both the firm's reputation and its clients' interests. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation, where technological advancement is integrated cautiously and systematically. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing automation across all client-facing processes simultaneously without prior validation poses a significant regulatory and ethical risk. This approach could lead to widespread errors in client communications, transaction processing, or data handling, potentially violating data protection laws and fiduciary duties. Demonstrates a disregard for the principle of know your client and the need for accurate, reliable service delivery. Focusing solely on cost reduction through automation, without considering the impact on data accuracy and client service quality, is a failure to uphold professional standards. This can result in misreporting, incorrect advice, or breaches of contractual obligations, leading to regulatory sanctions and loss of client confidence. It prioritizes financial gain over client welfare and regulatory compliance. Adopting automation solutions based purely on vendor claims without independent verification or pilot testing is professionally negligent. This can result in the deployment of systems that are not fit for purpose, leading to operational failures, data integrity issues, and non-compliance with regulatory mandates regarding system reliability and data security. It bypasses essential due diligence and risk management protocols. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization with a framework that integrates risk management, regulatory compliance, and client impact assessment. This involves 1. Identifying and prioritizing processes for automation based on risk and potential benefit. 2. Conducting thorough due diligence on any proposed automation solutions, including vendor vetting and independent validation. 3. Implementing automation in a phased manner, rigorous testing and monitoring at each stage. 4. Establishing clear metrics for success that include not only efficiency, but also accuracy, compliance, and client satisfaction. 5. Maintaining a continuous review process to adapt to evolving regulatory landscapes and technological advancements. This systematic and risk-aware approach ensures that optimization efforts enhance, rather than undermine, the firm's operational integrity and client relationships. Question 9. The control framework reveals that the current I/O solutions testing procedures are time-consuming and resource-intensive. A proposal has been put forward to streamline these tests by reducing the number of data points sampled and automating certain validation checks. Which of the following approaches best balances efficiency with the need to maintain robust internal controls and regulatory compliance? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify critical control points within the existing I/O solutions testing process. Based on this assessment, redesign the testing methodology to focus on high-risk areas, potentially reducing the scope of less critical tests and implementing targeted automation for efficiency gains, followed by rigorous validation of the new process. Option B. Eliminate manual validation checks entirely and rely solely on automated checks, assuming that automation inherently guarantees accuracy and compliance. Option C. Immediately implement the proposed changes to reduce the number of data points sampled and automate validation checks to achieve significant cost and time savings. Option D. Outsource the entire I/O solutions testing function to a third-party vendor without conducting due diligence on their control environment or the impact on internal compliance. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify critical control points within the existing I/O solutions testing process. Based on this assessment, redesign the testing methodology to focus on high-risk areas, potentially reducing the scope of less critical tests and implementing targeted automation for efficiency gains, followed by rigorous validation of the new process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the efficiency gains of process optimization with the imperative to maintain robust internal controls and regulatory compliance. The firm is seeking to streamline its I/O solutions testing procedures, which are critical for ensuring the integrity and reliability of financial data and client information. The challenge lies in identifying optimization strategies that do not compromise the effectiveness of these controls or introduce new risks that could lead to regulatory breaches or operational failures. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, risk-based methodology for process optimization. This involves a thorough understanding of the existing control framework, identifying specific testing procedures that are inefficient or redundant, and then designing and implementing changes that enhance efficiency without weakening control effectiveness. This approach aligns with regulatory expectations for sound internal governance and risk management, ensuring that any optimization efforts are documented, validated, and do not inadvertently create vulnerabilities. It demonstrates a commitment to continuous improvement while upholding the highest standards of control integrity, which is a core ethical and regulatory obligation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without a comprehensive risk assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the elimination of essential control steps, increasing the likelihood of errors, fraud, or non-compliance with regulations such as those governing data privacy, financial reporting, or anti-money laundering. Such an approach would represent a failure to adequately manage operational risk and could result in significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without proper testing or validation would also be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This bypasses critical quality assurance steps, potentially introducing unforeseen issues into the testing process. This lack of due diligence can lead to unreliable test results, which in turn could impact decision-making, client advice, and regulatory reporting, all of which carry serious compliance implications. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives of process optimization and the existing regulatory landscape. This should be followed by a detailed assessment of current processes, identifying areas for improvement through a risk-based lens. Any proposed changes must be evaluated for their impact on control effectiveness, compliance, and overall risk exposure. Implementation should be phased, with rigorous testing and validation at each stage. Continuous monitoring and review are essential to ensure that optimization efforts remain effective and compliant over time. Question 10. What factors determine the most effective process optimization for I/O solutions in a business context beyond raw technical metrics? Option A. Prioritizing the lowest possible storage hardware acquisition cost above all other considerations. Option B. Maximizing the number of input/output operations per second IOPS regardless of application needs. Option C. Implementing vendor-provided default configurations without further testing or tuning. Option D. Alignment with specific application workloads, user experience requirements, and defined business objectives. The correct answer is D. Alignment with specific application workloads, user experience requirements, and defined business objectives. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because optimizing I/O solutions requires a nuanced understanding of both technical performance and the specific business objectives they are intended to support. Simply focusing on raw throughput or latency without considering the application's actual needs can lead to misallocated resources, suboptimal user experience, and failure to meet critical business goals. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns technical solutions with strategic business outcomes by prioritizing factors that directly impact user productivity, application responsiveness within defined service level agreements, SLAs, and overall system efficiency as dictated by business requirements. The I/O solution is optimized for its intended purpose. This adheres to professional standards of delivering value and meeting client needs, which implicitly aligns with regulatory expectations for efficient and effective service delivery. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on maximizing IOPS input/output operations per second, without considering the application's actual workload or latency tolerance is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to over-provisioning of resources, increased costs, and potentially introducing latency in other critical areas if the system becomes imbalanced. Ethically, it fails to act in the best interest of the client by not delivering a truly optimized solution. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes minimizing storage costs above all else, even at the expense of application performance and user experience, is also professionally flawed. While cost efficiency is important, it should not compromise the fundamental functionality and usability of the I/O solution. This can lead to significant indirect costs through lost productivity and user dissatisfaction, and may violate implicit or explicit contractual obligations regarding performance. A third incorrect approach that relies solely on vendor default configurations without any performance tuning or validation against specific workloads is a failure of due diligence. Vendors provide general-purpose settings, but true optimization requires understanding the unique characteristics of the deployed applications and user behavior. This approach risks underperformance and can lead to a solution that is neither cost-effective nor efficient for the specific environment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough discovery phase to understand business objectives, application requirements, and user workflows. This should be followed by a performance analysis of the current state, identification of bottlenecks, and the development of a tailored optimization strategy that balances performance, cost, and reliability. Continuous monitoring and iterative refinement are crucial to ensure ongoing effectiveness. Question 11. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, less expensive software solution for client portfolio reporting could significantly reduce operational expenses for the firm. However, this new software has a less intuitive user interface and offers fewer customization options for client-specific reporting compared to the current system. Considering the firm's commitment to providing tailored client experiences and adhering to regulatory guidelines on client communication and reporting transparency, which of the following actions best reflects professional best practice? Option A. Reject the new software outright due to the perceived limitations in customization and user interface, opting to continue with the more expensive established system. Option B. Conduct a pilot program with a select group of clients to gather feedback on the new software's reporting capabilities and user experience before a full rollout, while also assessing potential workarounds for customization needs. Option C. Proceed with the implementation of the new software, focusing on training staff to adapt to its limitations and emphasizing the cost savings in internal communications. Option D. Negotiate with the software vendor to include enhanced customization features in the new software, even if it increases the initial implementation cost, to ensure it meets client needs and regulatory standards. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the implementation of the new software, focusing on training staff to adapt to its limitations and emphasizing the cost savings in internal communications. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial benefits of a proposed solution against its long-term implications for client well-being and regulatory compliance. The pressure to adopt a cost-saving measure, even if it appears beneficial on the surface, necessitates a thorough evaluation that goes beyond simple financial metrics. Professionals must consider their fiduciary duty to clients, adherence to industry standards, and the potential for unintended negative consequences. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, client-centric evaluation that aligns with regulatory expectations for suitability and client care. It acknowledges that while cost-effectiveness is a factor, it cannot supersede the fundamental requirement to act in the client's best interest. This approach demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and robust due diligence, ensuring that any solution implemented is not only financially viable, but also appropriate for the client's specific circumstances and objectives, thereby adhering to principles of good governance and client protection as mandated by relevant regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate cost savings without adequately assessing the impact on client outcomes or regulatory adherence would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, as it prioritizes the firm's or advisor's financial interest over the client's. Furthermore, it could lead to regulatory breaches related to suitability, inadequate risk assessment, or misrepresentation of services, potentially resulting in sanctions, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the cost-benefit analysis entirely without proper justification would also be problematic, as it fails to demonstrate a reasoned and evidence-based decision-making process, potentially leading to inefficient resource allocation or missed opportunities for genuine client benefit. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem or opportunity, followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. Next, they should gather comprehensive information, including financial data, regulatory requirements, and client-specific needs. This information should then be analyzed using a structured approach, such as a detailed cost-benefit analysis that incorporates qualitative factors alongside quantitative ones. Finally, decisions should be made based on a thorough evaluation of all options against ethical principles, regulatory obligations, and the overarching goal of achieving the best possible outcome for the client. Question 12. Regulatory review indicates that a client who has expressed a strong preference for investing in a specific sector known for its volatility is seeking advice on portfolio allocation. The advisor has identified that this preference, if followed exclusively, could lead to a portfolio that is significantly misaligned with the client's stated long-term retirement goals and risk tolerance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Conduct a detailed suitability assessment, clearly explaining to the client how their preferred sector investment aligns or misaligns with their stated retirement goals and risk tolerance, and present alternative strategies that incorporate their preference while mitigating risks. Option B. Implement the client's preferred sector investment strategy without further questioning, as the client's directive is paramount. Option C. Focus the discussion solely on the potential short-term tax advantages of the preferred sector investment, deferring any discussion of long-term goals. Option D. Advise the client that their preferred sector investment is unsuitable and unilaterally recommend a completely different conservative investment strategy. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed suitability assessment, clearly explaining to the client how their preferred sector investment aligns or misaligns with their stated retirement goals and risk tolerance, and present alternative strategies that incorporate their preference while mitigating risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the potential for those preferences to lead to suboptimal investment outcomes, especially when viewed through the lens of fiduciary duty. The challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the advisor's responsibility to act in the client's best interest, as mandated by regulatory frameworks. The advisor must navigate the complexities of understanding the client's true objectives, assessing the suitability of proposed solutions, and communicating these assessments effectively without being overly prescriptive or dismissive of the client's input. This requires a deep understanding of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term goals, which may not always be explicitly articulated. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented process of understanding the client's stated preferences, probing for underlying motivations, and then objectively assessing the suitability of investment solutions against those stated preferences and the client's broader financial objectives. This includes clearly explaining the rationale behind any recommendations, highlighting potential risks and benefits, and ensuring the client fully comprehends the implications of their choices. This aligns with regulatory expectations that advisors conduct comprehensive suitability assessments, act in good faith, and provide clear, understandable advice. It upholds the fiduciary standard by prioritizing the client's best interests while respecting their right to make informed decisions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Blindly implementing the client's preferred strategy without adequate due diligence or suitability assessment represents a failure to meet the advisor's fiduciary duty. This approach risks exposing the client to undue risk or missing opportunities for growth, potentially violating regulations that require advisors to recommend suitable investments. Dismissing the client's preferences outright and imposing a different strategy, even if deemed superior by the advisor, can be seen as patronizing and may erode client trust. While the advisor has a duty to advise, a complete disregard for client input can lead to a breakdown in the professional relationship and may not align with principles of client-centric advice. Focusing solely on the immediate tax benefits without considering the long-term investment implications or the client's overall financial plan is a narrow and potentially detrimental approach. This can lead to suboptimal portfolio construction and may not serve the client's holistic financial well-being, contravening the spirit of comprehensive financial planning and suitability requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with active listening and thorough client discovery. This involves asking open-ended questions to uncover not just stated preferences, but also the why behind them. Following discovery, a comprehensive suitability assessment should be conducted, evaluating potential solutions against the client's stated goals, risk tolerance, time horizon, and financial situation. The advisor should then present a range of suitable options, clearly articulating the pros and cons of each, including how they align with or diverge from the client's initial preferences. The final decision should be a collaborative one, with the client making an informed choice based on the advisor's guidance. Documentation of this entire process is crucial for regulatory compliance and professional accountability. Question 13. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, less expensive I/O solution for client portfolio rebalancing could significantly reduce operational expenses. However, preliminary internal reviews suggest this new solution might offer slightly less granular control over trade execution compared to the current system, potentially impacting the precision of achieving target asset allocations in volatile market conditions. The firm is under pressure to demonstrate cost efficiencies to its shareholders. What is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive pilot program with a representative subset of client portfolios to rigorously test the new I/O solution's performance, accuracy, and impact on achieving target allocations under various market conditions, while simultaneously assessing its compliance with all relevant regulatory guidelines. Option B. Implement the new I/O solution immediately to realize cost savings, and then initiate a separate, longer-term project to explore enhancements that could improve its granular control capabilities. Option C. Proceed with the implementation of the new I/O solution, focusing on the documented cost savings and addressing any minor deviations in asset allocation post-implementation through manual adjustments. Option D. Reject the new I/O solution outright due to the potential for reduced granular control, prioritizing the existing system's precision over any potential cost savings, and inform shareholders that cost efficiencies cannot be achieved without compromising client service quality. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the implementation of the new I/O solution, focusing on the documented cost savings and addressing any minor deviations in asset allocation post-implementation through manual adjustments. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial benefits of a proposed solution against its potential long-term implications for client outcomes and regulatory compliance. The pressure to implement a cost-saving measure, even if it appears beneficial on the surface, necessitates a thorough evaluation that goes beyond simple financial metrics. Professionals must consider the impact on the quality of service, client trust, and adherence to regulatory standards, particularly those governing the provision of investment advice and solutions. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic assessment that includes not only cost savings, but also the effectiveness and suitability of the proposed I/O solution for the diverse needs of the client base. This aligns with regulatory requirements that mandate acting in the best interests of clients and ensuring that investment solutions are appropriate. Ethical considerations also demand transparency and a commitment to delivering value that is not solely driven by cost reduction. This approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to client welfare, which are foundational to maintaining professional integrity and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost savings, without adequately assessing the impact on client outcomes or regulatory adherence, fails to meet the fiduciary duty owed to clients. This could lead to regulatory breaches if the chosen solution is found to be less effective or even detrimental to clients, potentially resulting in fines, sanctions, or reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes a quick implementation to realize cost benefits, without sufficient testing or validation of the I/O solution's performance and reliability, risks client dissatisfaction and potential operational failures. This demonstrates a lack of professional care and foresight, which can have serious consequences. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the objectives of the I/O solution, considering both cost efficiency and client benefit. This should be followed by a comprehensive evaluation of potential solutions, including rigorous testing and validation, and a thorough risk assessment. Crucially, the assessment must incorporate a review of the solution's alignment with all relevant regulatory requirements and ethical standards. Stakeholder consultation, including input from compliance and client-facing teams, is also vital to ensure a well-rounded decision. Question 14. Benchmark analysis indicates that a new client is eager for a rapidly deployed I/O solution to address a critical business need. While the internal development team has completed initial design and theoretical validation, there is pressure to bypass a formal pilot testing phase to meet the client's aggressive timeline. What is the most professionally responsible approach to ensure the solution's effectiveness and client satisfaction? Option A. Utilize existing anecdotal feedback from similar, but not identical past projects to justify the solution's readiness for deployment. Option B. Focus on extensive documentation and training materials for the client's internal team, assuming they will identify and report any issues post-deployment. Option C. Proceed with immediate full-scale deployment, relying on the theoretical validation and the development team's confidence in the solution's design. Option D. Conduct a limited pilot study with a representative subset of the client's target users to gather empirical data on performance and user experience before full rollout. The correct answer is D. Conduct a limited pilot study with a representative subset of the client's target users to gather empirical data on performance and user experience before full rollout. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a new product launch with the long-term implications of inadequate testing, potentially impacting client trust and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet market demands can lead to shortcuts, but a responsible professional must prioritize robust validation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the fundamental principles of I/O solutions tests, which emphasize thoroughness, accuracy, and client benefit. By conducting a comprehensive pilot study, the firm demonstrates a commitment to data integrity and risk mitigation. This proactive step ensures that the solution is not only effective, but also ethically sound and compliant with any relevant testing standards or guidelines that mandate validation before full deployment. It upholds the professional duty to deliver reliable and validated solutions, safeguarding both the client's investment and the firm's reputation. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate deployment without adequate pilot testing fails to uphold professional standards. This could lead to the introduction of a flawed or ineffective solution, resulting in client dissatisfaction, financial losses, and potential reputational damage. From a regulatory perspective, depending on the specific industry and jurisdiction, deploying unvalidated solutions might contravene guidelines that require evidence of efficacy and safety, potentially leading to sanctions or disciplinary actions. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on theoretical validation without practical application, overlooks the critical real-world context. Theoretical soundness is important. I/O solutions tests are inherently practical. Failing to test in a simulated or actual environment means potential issues that only emerge during use will be missed, leading to the same negative consequences as immediate deployment without testing. A third incorrect approach, relying on anecdotal evidence or testimonials from a limited, non-representative group, is professionally unsound. Such evidence is subjective, prone to bias, and does not provide the objective, quantifiable data required for robust validation. This approach risks making decisions based on incomplete or misleading information, which is contrary to the principles of evidence-based practice central to I/O solutions tests. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment. This includes identifying potential negative outcomes of each course of action, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and determining the most responsible path forward. Prioritizing a phased approach, starting with pilot testing and iterative refinement, is a hallmark of professional diligence in I/O solutions tests. This ensures that decisions are data-driven, ethically defensible, and aligned with the ultimate goal of delivering effective and reliable solutions. Question 15. Compliance review shows a potential deficiency in the firm's current I/O solutions testing procedures, particularly concerning the validation of data integrity and security protocols for new market data feeds. What is the most appropriate next step for the firm's compliance and technology departments? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the relevant regulatory framework and internal policies to identify specific testing requirements for market data feeds, and then design a risk-based testing plan tailored to these requirements. Option B. Immediately cease the use of all new market data feeds until a comprehensive, firm-wide overhaul of I/O solutions testing can be completed. Option C. Implement a standardized, high-frequency testing protocol for all I/O solutions, regardless of the specific market data feed or its perceived risk. Option D. Rely on the assurances provided by the vendors of the new market data feeds regarding their data integrity and security, and document these assurances. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the relevant regulatory framework and internal policies to identify specific testing requirements for market data feeds, and then design a risk-based testing plan tailored to these requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the compliance review has identified a potential gap in the firm's I/O solutions testing procedures. The challenge lies in interpreting the scope and intent of the regulatory framework concerning I/O solutions testing, particularly when dealing with new or evolving technologies. The firm must balance the need for robust testing with the practicalities of implementation and the potential for overregulation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that testing is both effective and proportionate, meeting regulatory expectations without stifling innovation or imposing undue burdens. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the relevant regulatory framework, specifically focusing on guidance related to I/O solutions testing and the principles of proportionality and risk-based assessment. This approach is best professional practice because it directly addresses the compliance finding by seeking to understand the regulatory requirements and applying them to the firm's specific context. It demonstrates a commitment to adhering to the spirit and letter of the law, ensuring that testing is aligned with identified risks and regulatory objectives. This proactive and informed approach minimizes the likelihood of future noncompliance and builds a strong foundation for the firm's testing strategy. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the compliance finding as a minor oversight without further investigation. This is professionally unacceptable as it ignores a direct regulatory concern and risks escalating into more serious issues. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to engage with the compliance function, potentially violating ethical duties to act with integrity and due care. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a broad, overly burdensome testing regime for all I/O solutions without a clear understanding of the specific risks or regulatory expectations. This is professionally unsound because it is inefficient, costly, and may not effectively address the identified compliance gap. It fails to apply a risk-based approach, which is often a cornerstone of regulatory compliance, and could be seen as a reactive, rather than a strategic, response. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on vendor assurances regarding the I/O solutions compliance without independent verification. This is professionally negligent and ethically questionable. It abdicates the firm's responsibility to ensure its own compliance and could lead to significant regulatory penalties if the vendor's assurances prove to be inaccurate. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, they must thoroughly understand the specific compliance finding and the underlying regulatory requirements. This involves consulting the relevant regulatory texts and any associated guidance. Second, they should assess the risks associated with the identified gap, considering the potential impact on clients, the firm, and market integrity. Third, they should develop a proportionate and risk-based testing strategy that directly addresses the compliance finding, drawing on internal expertise and, where necessary, external advice. Finally, they should document their rationale and the implemented testing procedures to demonstrate due diligence and compliance to both internal and external stakeholders. Question 16. The efficiency study reveals that a new financial product can be brought to market 2 weeks earlier if certain I/O solutions tests are expedited, potentially capturing a fleeting market advantage. The client is strongly advocating for this accelerated timeline, suggesting that a full suite of tests might be overly cautious given the product's perceived robustness. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial professional? Option A. Insist on completing all mandated I/O solutions tests as per the regulatory framework, explaining the risks of premature market entry without full validation. Option B. Inform the client that the expedited timeline is not feasible due to regulatory requirements and suggest exploring alternative strategies that do not compromise testing integrity. Option C. Proceed with market entry immediately, deferring the remaining I/O solutions tests until after the product is launched to capitalize on the perceived market opportunity. Option D. Agree to expedite the timeline by performing only a subset of the I/O solutions tests that appear most critical, based on the client's assessment. The correct answer is A. Insist on completing all mandated I/O solutions tests as per the regulatory framework, explaining the risks of premature market entry without full validation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a client with the long-term implications of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The client's desire to expedite a process, driven by a perceived market opportunity, conflicts with the need for thorough and accurate I/O solutions tests, which are designed to ensure the integrity and reliability of financial products. Professionals must navigate this tension by prioritizing their fiduciary duties and adherence to regulatory standards over client demands that could compromise these principles. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it upholds the fundamental principles of regulatory compliance and client protection mandated by the relevant framework. By insisting on the completion of all required I/O solutions tests, the professional demonstrates a commitment to due diligence, risk mitigation, and the provision of sound, compliant financial solutions. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the best interests of the client and the market, ensuring that products are not only profitable but also safe and reliable. Adherence to the specified regulatory framework, which likely includes guidelines on product testing and approval, is paramount. An incorrect approach that prioritizes the client's timeline over essential testing would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to the introduction of flawed or non-compliant products into the market, potentially causing financial harm to investors and reputational damage to the firm. Such an action would violate the duty of care owed to the client and the broader market, and could result in severe penalties, sanctions, and loss of professional licenses. Another incorrect approach might involve selectively performing tests, which undermines the comprehensive nature of I/O solutions tests and introduces unacceptable risks. This selective approach fails to provide adequate assurance of the product's performance and compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. When faced with conflicting demands, the professional should first identify the core principles at stake. They should then clearly communicate the necessity of adhering to the regulatory framework and the potential risks of noncompliance to the client. If the client remains insistent on compromising standards, the professional must be prepared to decline the engagement or escalate the issue to senior management or compliance departments, prioritizing integrity and regulatory adherence above all else. Question 17. Market research demonstrates that a significant upcoming product launch by a publicly traded company is likely to cause a substantial increase in its stock price. An investment manager, privy to this confidential information through their firm's due diligence process, is considering their next steps. Which of the following actions best upholds regulatory and ethical standards? Option A. Advise clients to hold off on any trades in the company's stock until after the announcement without disclosing the specific reason. Option B. Refrain from trading the company's stock or any related securities until the information is publicly disclosed. Option C. Inform a close friend about the upcoming launch so they can make a timely investment. Option D. Execute personal trades in the company's stock to capitalize on the anticipated price increase before the announcement. The correct answer is B. Refrain from trading the company's stock or any related securities until the information is publicly disclosed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an investment manager to balance the fiduciary duty owed to clients with the potential for personal gain. The manager has access to non-public information about an upcoming product launch that could significantly impact the company's stock price. The temptation to trade on this information before it becomes public is high, but doing so would violate insider trading regulations and ethical principles. The core of the challenge lies in resisting this temptation and adhering to the strict legal and ethical boundaries governing the use of material non-public information. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves refraining from trading on the material non-public information. This aligns with the fundamental principles of fair markets and investor protection enshrined in securities regulations. Specifically, it adheres to the prohibition against trading while in possession of material non-public information, which is a cornerstone of insider trading laws. By not trading, the investment manager upholds their fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of their clients and avoids any appearance of impropriety or market manipulation. This approach ensures compliance with regulatory frameworks designed to maintain market integrity and investor confidence. Incorrect approaches analysis. Trading on the information before the public announcement constitutes a clear violation of insider trading laws. This is because the information is material, likely to affect the stock price, and non-public. Such an action breaches the fiduciary duty owed to clients, as it prioritizes personal gain over client interests and potentially exposes clients to unfair market conditions. It also violates ethical codes of conduct that prohibit the exploitation of privileged information. Disclosing the information to a friend or family member before the public announcement, even without directly trading oneself, is also a form of illegal tipping. This constitutes insider trading by proxy and carries similar legal and ethical ramifications. It facilitates illegal trading by others and undermines the principle of equal access to information for all market participants. Delaying a client's trade until after the announcement, while seemingly protective, could still be problematic if the manager's decision to delay is influenced by their knowledge of the impending positive news. If the delay is not based on a sound, pre-existing investment strategy for that client, it could be construed as an attempt to indirectly benefit from the insider information or to manipulate the timing of trades in a way that is not in the client's best interest, potentially violating best execution obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must employ a robust decision-making framework centered on regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Information assessment. Immediately identify information as potentially material and non-public. 2. Policy adherence. Consult and strictly follow the firm's internal policies regarding the use of material non-public information in personal trading. 3. Prohibition confirmation. Recognize the absolute prohibition against trading or tipping based on such information. 4. Disclosure and consultation. If there is any doubt or pressure, disclose the situation to the compliance department or legal counsel for guidance. 5. Fiduciary duty prioritization. Always prioritize the best interests of clients and the integrity of the market above personal gain. Question 18. The monitoring system demonstrates a recurring anomaly in the recorded transaction dates for a specific segment of client accounts, potentially indicating a systemic data integrity issue. Option A. Discuss the anomaly informally with a colleague to gauge their opinion before deciding on any action. Option B. Immediately escalate the anomaly to the compliance department for a formal investigation and follow established internal procedures for data discrepancy resolution. Option C. Ignore the anomaly, as the volume of affected accounts is small and unlikely to trigger regulatory attention. Option D. Attempt to manually correct the transaction dates in the system without further investigation or reporting, assuming it is a minor, isolated error. Correct answer is B. Immediately escalate the anomaly to the compliance department for a formal investigation and follow established internal procedures for data discrepancy resolution. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an immediate and informed decision regarding a potential breach of regulatory requirements, specifically concerning the accuracy and integrity of client data. Firms' obligation to maintain accurate client records is paramount, and any deviation, even if seemingly minor or unintentional, can have significant regulatory and reputational consequences. The challenge lies in balancing the need for swift action with the requirement for thorough investigation and adherence to established procedures. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes regulatory compliance and client protection. By immediately escalating the issue to the compliance department and initiating a formal investigation, the firm demonstrates a commitment to upholding its regulatory obligations under the relevant framework, e.g., FCA Handbook in the UK or SEC regulations in the US, depending on the exam's specified jurisdiction. This proactive stance ensures that any identified discrepancies are addressed systematically, documented appropriately, and rectified in accordance with regulatory expectations. It also safeguards against potential client harm and minimizes the risk of further regulatory scrutiny. An incorrect approach that involves ignoring the discrepancy or attempting to rectify it without proper documentation and escalation would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such actions could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal a breach, leading to severe penalties, including fines and reputational damage. Furthermore, failing to investigate and report potential data inaccuracies violates the duty of care owed to clients and undermines the integrity of the financial markets. Another incorrect approach, such as making assumptions about the cause of the discrepancy without a formal investigation, risks misdiagnosing the problem and implementing ineffective solutions, potentially leading to continued noncompliance. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework when faced with such situations. This framework typically involves 1. Identifying the potential issue and its immediate implications. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. 3. Escalating the issue to the appropriate internal department, e.g., compliance, risk management. 4. Initiating a formal investigation to gather facts and determine the root cause. 5. Documenting all findings, actions taken, and decisions made. 6. Implementing corrective actions and preventative measures. 7. Reporting the incident and resolution as required by regulations. This systematic process ensures that decisions are evidence-based, compliant, and ethically sound. Question 19. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client has requested the immediate liquidation of a significant portion of their investment portfolio to fund an unexpected personal expense. The client expresses urgency and a clear directive to proceed without delay. As the investment manager, what is the most appropriate initial course of action? Option A. Inform the client that the request cannot be processed due to the current market volatility and suggest they wait for a more favorable market condition. Option B. Schedule an immediate meeting with the client to discuss the reasons for the request, review their overall financial situation, and explain the potential implications of early liquidation, including tax consequences and market timing risks. Option C. Advise the client that liquidating now would be detrimental to their long-term goals and refuse to process the request until they reconsider. Option D. Proceed with the liquidation as requested to meet the client's urgent need, prioritizing their immediate directive. The correct answer is B. Schedule an immediate meeting with the client to discuss the reasons for the request, review their overall financial situation, and explain the potential implications of early liquidation, including tax consequences and market timing risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an investment manager to balance the immediate need for a client's liquidity with the long-term fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, considering potential future market movements and the impact of premature asset liquidation. The manager must navigate the inherent conflict between a client's stated desire and the potential for that desire to be detrimental to their overall financial well-being. Careful judgment is required to avoid acting solely on the client's immediate request without due diligence. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the client's situation and the implications of their request. This involves a detailed review of the client's financial goals, risk tolerance, and the specific investment portfolio. By engaging in a consultative process, the manager can educate the client on the potential consequences of liquidating assets prematurely, such as incurring significant capital gains taxes, missing out on potential future growth, or incurring early withdrawal penalties. This aligns with the fiduciary duty to act with prudence and in the client's best interest, as mandated by regulatory frameworks governing investment advisors, which emphasize client suitability and a duty of care. The manager is acting as a trusted advisor, not merely an order taker. An incorrect approach that involves immediately processing the client's request without further discussion or analysis fails to uphold the fiduciary duty. This could lead to a regulatory breach by not acting prudently or in the client's best interest. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and a potential disregard for the client's long-term financial health. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the client's request outright without understanding the underlying reasons, is also professionally unacceptable. While the manager may believe they are acting in the client's best interest, this paternalistic stance can damage the client relationship and may overlook legitimate, albeit urgent, needs. It fails to engage in the necessary dialogue to understand the client's evolving circumstances and can be seen as a failure to adequately serve the client's needs. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured framework. 1. Understand the client's request. Clearly ascertain the client's stated objective and the immediate reason for it. 2. Assess the client's situation. Review the client's overall financial plan, goals, risk profile, and the specifics of the portfolio in question. 3. Analyze the implications. Evaluate the short-term and long-term consequences of fulfilling the request, including tax implications, market timing, penalties, and impact on future growth. 4. Consult and educate. Engage in a transparent discussion with the client, explaining the potential ramifications and exploring alternative solutions that might meet their needs with less adverse impact. 5. Document decisions. Thoroughly document all discussions, analyses, and the final decision-making process, ensuring it aligns with regulatory requirements and the client's best interests. Question 20. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a long-term client, who has historically expressed a strong aversion to market volatility, is now insisting on investing a significant portion of their portfolio in a highly speculative, illiquid asset class that has recently experienced a surge in popularity. The client cites anecdotal evidence from social media as their primary motivation. As the advisor, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Advise the client that their request is ill-advised due to their historical risk aversion and social media trends, and refuse to proceed with the investment without further discussion. Option B. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's current financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives, and then provide objective advice on the suitability of the proposed investment, including a clear explanation of the associated risks and potential alternatives that align with their established risk profile. Option C. Focus on the potential for high returns associated with the speculative asset class and proceed with the investment, assuming the client understands the inherent risks based on their request. Option D. Immediately execute the client's requested investment to maintain client satisfaction and avoid potential conflict, as their instructions are paramount. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's current financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives, and then provide objective advice on the suitability of the proposed investment, including a clear explanation of the associated risks and potential alternatives that align with their established risk profile. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's preference may lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. The advisor must navigate the client's emotional attachment to a particular investment strategy while upholding their professional obligations under the relevant regulatory framework. The challenge lies in providing objective advice that prioritizes the client's long-term financial well-being over immediate, potentially misguided, desires. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, followed by an objective assessment of investment options. This aligns with the core principles of client-centric advice mandated by regulatory bodies. Specifically, it requires the advisor to 1. Gather comprehensive client information. This includes financial status, investment experience, risk tolerance, and specific financial goals. 2. Educate the client. Clearly explain the risks and potential downsides of their preferred strategy, as well as the benefits of alternative, more suitable options. 3. Present objective recommendations. Based on the gathered information and regulatory guidelines, propose investment solutions that are demonstrably in the client's best interest, even if they differ from the client's initial preference. 4. Document the process. Maintain detailed records of all discussions, recommendations, and the client's final decisions, including any deviations from the advisor's advice. This approach ensures compliance with the duty of care and the obligation to act in the client's best interest, as stipulated by the regulatory framework governing financial advice. It emphasizes informed consent and a transparent advisory process. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that solely capitulates to the client's stated preference without due diligence fails to uphold the advisor's fiduciary duty. This would be a regulatory and ethical failure because it prioritizes client satisfaction over client welfare, potentially exposing the client to undue risk or suboptimal returns. It neglects the advisor's responsibility to provide expert, objective guidance. An approach that dismisses the client's concerns outright without attempting to understand their rationale or educate them on alternatives is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and communication, potentially damaging the client relationship and failing to meet the standard of care expected of a financial advisor. It may also violate principles of fair treatment and transparency. An approach that focuses solely on the potential for immediate commission or fees, regardless of the suitability of the investment for the client, represents a severe breach of ethical conduct and regulatory requirements. This is a conflict of interest that compromises the advisor's objectivity and places personal gain above the client's best interests. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive client discovery process. This involves active listening to understand not just stated preferences, but also underlying needs and concerns. Following discovery, the advisor must conduct a rigorous analysis of suitable investment options, considering all relevant factors including risk, return, liquidity, and time horizon. The next critical step is transparent communication, where the advisor educates the client on the pros and cons of various strategies, clearly articulating why certain options are more aligned with their objectives and risk profile. The final decision should be a collaborative one, with the client making an informed choice based on the advisor's expert guidance. Documentation throughout this process is paramount for accountability and regulatory compliance.